My alien housekeeper pinned me at dawn. Her explanation stunned me. What would you do if you woke up one morning to find a mysterious alien pinning you down, her sparkling eyes gazing straight into yours, and her explanation afterward turned your entire world upside down? Today I, the narrator of the Nebula channel, will take you to New Terra in the year 2078, where Jack Sheppard, a solitary aerospace engineer, unexpectedly encounters Elara Vox, a Zoryn housekeeper with shimmering silver skin and secrets beyond imagination. Don't miss out because the climax will leave you absolutely speechless. Before we dive into the story, please leave a like and a subscribe to help my channel reach 1,000 subscribers soon. Your support is a huge motivation for us to keep bringing you more thrilling adventures. Want us to cover a specific topic next? Drop a comment below, or simply leave a 1 if you find it captivating, or a 0 if it needs improvement. Now, are you ready to step into a universe full of surprises? Let's explore it together. Chapter 1. A Meeting in the Dawn Light. The first light of dawn crept through the polarized glass of Jack Sheppard's apartment, casting a soft, golden glow across the sleek, minimalist room. New Terra, the sprawling intergalactic metropolis of 2078, hummed faintly beyond the walls, a symphony of distant hovercars, the low rumble of starships, and the occasional chime of an AI assistant somewhere in the building. Jack stirred beneath his sheets, his mind still clinging to the edges of a dream about asteroid fields and engine schematics. He was a man of routine, a 32-year-old aerospace engineer who thrived on the predictable hum of machinery and the quiet solitude of his high-rise sanctuary. That solitude, however, was about to shatter in a way he could never have anticipated. A strange weight pressed against his chest, cool and unfamiliar, snapping him fully awake. His hazel eyes blinked open, adjusting to the light, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A figure, a woman or something resembling one, lay sprawled across him, her body draped over his like a living blanket. Her skin shimmered with a faint silvery sheen, catching the dawn rays in a way that made it look almost liquid. Long, delicate tendrils of what might have been hair, or perhaps scales, ran down her back, glinting like polished opals. She was utterly still, her breathing slow and rhythmic, her face nestled just below his chin. Jack's heart thudded against his ribs, a wild drumbeat of confusion and alarm. "What the hell?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from sleep and shock. The words barely escaped his lips before the figure stirred, her head tilting slightly. A pair of luminous emerald eyes fluttered open, locking onto his with an intensity that made his stomach lurch. For a moment they stared at each other, suspended in a silence so thick it felt tangible. Then, with a grace that defied the awkwardness of the situation, she rolled off him, landing lightly on the edge of the bed. Her movements were fluid, almost serpentine, and Jack scrambled to sit up, yanking the sheet around his waist in a belated attempt at modesty. "By the rings of Zoryn, I am so sorry." Her voice was melodic, a cascade of notes that seemed to dance in the air. She pressed a slender hand to her chest, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and genuine distress. "I didn't mean to startle you, Mr. Sheppard. This is entirely my fault. I should have warned you about our customs when I arrived." Jack blinked, his mind racing to catch up. "Warn me? About, what exactly is this?" He gestured vaguely at the space between them, his voice cracking with disbelief. The woman, Elara Vox, he remembered now, the housekeeper he'd hired through the interstellar domestic service, wasn't human. He'd known that when he signed the contract, of course. Her profile had listed her as a Zoryn, a species from a distant planet known for their adaptability and efficiency. But nothing in the agency's glossy hollow brochure had prepared him for this. Elara tilted her head, her emerald eyes narrowing slightly as if she were studying him. "My people require physical contact to regulate our energy in foreign environments," she explained, her tone matter-of-fact despite the flush of silver deepening along her cheekbones. "It's a survival mechanism deeply ingrained. When I finished my tasks last night and saw you sleeping, well, my instincts took over. I meant no offense." Jack ran a hand through his tousled brown hair, trying to process her words. "So you're telling me you just climbed on top of me because it's a Zoryn thing?" His voice rose slightly, teetering between incredulity and a laugh he couldn't quite suppress. He glanced down, suddenly hyper-aware of his own state of undress, and tightened his grip on the sheet. "Look, Elara, I'm going to need a little more than instincts to wrap my head around this." She nodded, her tendrils shimmering as they shifted with her movement. "I understand your confusion. On Zoryn we share warmth and energy with those we trust. It's a sign of camaraderie, nothing more. But I see now that humans might interpret it differently." Her lips curved into a small, apologetic smile, revealing a hint of pointed teeth that only added to her otherworldly allure. I should have asked permission. Or at least worn something less minimal. Jack's face heated at the realization that she too was barely clothed. A thin, translucent garment clung to her form, more like a whisper of fabric than anything substantial. He forced his eyes back to her face, determined to keep this from spiraling further into absurdity. Yeah, that might have helped, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Okay, let's take a step back. How about we get dressed and you explain this over breakfast or something? I need coffee before I can deal with alien sleepovers. Elara's smile widened, a flicker of amusement dancing in her eyes. Breakfast is an excellent idea. I've studied your dietary preferences, coffee, yes? And perhaps some of those, what do you call them? Toasted bread slices with spread. Toast, Jack supplied, unable to stop a grin from tugging at his lips despite the chaos of the moment. Yeah, toast works. Toast it is then. She rose from the bed with that same liquid grace, retrieving a neatly folded uniform from a chair in the corner. It was a simple tunic, metallic gray to match her skin, but it somehow made her look even more striking. As she slipped it on, she glanced back at him, her expression softening. I truly didn't mean to unsettle you, Jack. My species, we form connections quickly through touch. It's how we bond. I suppose I forgot that humans don't work quite the same way. He froze mid-motion, halfway out of bed, the sheet still clutched around him. Wait, you can feel that? Like what I'm feeling right now. His pulse quickened at the thought, a mix of embarrassment and curiosity flooding through him. Elara paused at the doorway, her tendrils swaying slightly. Not precisely. It's more like echoes. Your heartbeat, your temperature. They tell me you're surprised, a little nervous but not angry. It's comforting in a way. She hesitated, then added, I'll start the coffee. Take your time. And with that, she slipped out of the room, leaving Jack alone with the lingering coolness where her body had pressed against his. He flopped back onto the pillows, staring at the ceiling as his mind spun. What have I gotten myself into? He murmured, the words dissolving into the quiet hum of the apartment. 20 minutes later, he emerged from his bedroom, now dressed in a casual jumpsuit, standard attire for a man who spent half his life tinkering with starship engines. The scent of coffee wafted through the air, mingling with something sweeter, almost floral. He found Elara in the kitchen, a compact space lined with sleek appliances and a panoramic window overlooking New Terra's skyline. She moved with practiced ease, her silvery hands deftly arranging a tray of toast and a steaming mug. You're fast, Jack remarked, sliding onto a stool at the counter. I didn't even hear you come in last night. I'm designed to be discreet, she replied, placing the mug in front of him. Or at least I try to be. Last night was an exception. Her tendrils shimmered faintly, a sign, he was beginning to suspect, of her emotions. I hope the coffee is to your liking. The agency provided a detailed profile of your habits. Jack took a sip, the rich bitterness grounding him amidst the morning's surreal start. They told you about my coffee, but not that humans don't usually share beds with strangers? Elara's laugh was soft, like wind chimes in a breeze. Apparently not. Their briefing on human customs was rather brief. I'll adapt though. I'm here to assist you after all, not to cause chaos. He studied her over the rim of his mug, noting the way the dawn light played across her silver skin, highlighting the delicate patterns of her tendrils. She was alien, yes, but there was a warmth to her presence, a quiet curiosity that tugged at something deep within him. Well, you've already got the chaos part down, he said, his tone lighter now. But let's set some ground rules. Rule 1. No more surprise cuddle sessions, okay? Noted, she agreed, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Though I should point out, Jack, you're still holding that sheet awfully tight. I'm dressed now, you can relax. He glanced down, realizing he'd dragged the sheet with him out of habit, and let it drop with a sheepish chuckle. Right. Habit. So what's next? You make breakfast, I drink coffee, and we pretend this never happened. Or, Elara suggested, leaning against the counter, we use this as a chance to learn from each other. You're my first human employer. I'd like to understand you better, if you'll let me. Jack met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. There was no malice in her, no threat, just an earnestness that made his chest ache in a way he couldn't quite name. Yeah, he said finally, his voice softer. I think I'd like that too. And so, beneath the rising sun of New Terra, a tentative bond began to form, one that neither of them could yet fathom would change their lives forever. Chapter 2, Lunch by the Water's Edge. The artificial sun of New Terra hung high above the city, casting a steady warm light over the garden tucked behind Jack Sheppard's apartment. It was a small oasis amidst the steel and glass of the intergalactic metropolis, a patch of synthetic grass, a scattering of bioengineered trees, and a shallow pool that shimmered with holographic ripples, mimicking the gentle waves of an Earth long past. Jack had always found the space calming, a place to unwind after long shifts calibrating starship thrusters or troubleshooting AI navigation glitches. But today, as he stepped out onto the garden patio, that familiar peace felt tinged with something new, something electric and uncharted. Elara Vox stood near the pool, her silver skin catching the light in a way that made her look like a living sculpture. She was arranging a small table with a precision that bordered on artistry, her tendrils swaying gently as she worked. A few days had passed since their awkward dawn encounter, and though Jack had insisted on ground rules, no more uninvited sleepovers, they'd settled into an odd, tentative rhythm. She cleaned with an efficiency that left his apartment spotless, cooked meals that surprised him with their flavor, and moved through his life with a quiet presence that he couldn't quite ignore. Now, as he watched her set out plates and a picture of something faintly glowing, he felt a flicker of curiosity stir beneath his usual guarded exterior. "What's all this?" he asked, stepping closer. His voice carried a mix of amusement and genuine intrigue, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jumpsuit as he took in the scene. The table held an array of dishes, slivers of grilled meat that emitted a soft, luminescent sheen, a bowl of vibrant greens he recognized from Earth markets, and a cluster of small, pearlescent fruits that pulsed faintly like tiny stars. Elara glanced up, her emerald eyes bright with a warmth that made Jack's chest tighten inexplicably. "Lunch?" she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I thought we could share a meal outside today. The agency profile mentioned you enjoy open spaces, and I've been meaning to try blending Zoryn flavors with your human cuisine. Do you approve?" Jack raised an eyebrow, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're really leaning into that profile, huh? What else did they tell you? My favorite color. My shoe size. Blue," she replied without missing a beat, "and 11 by Earth standards. But I figured the food would be a better starting point." Her tendrils shimmered faintly, a sign, he was beginning to suspect, of her amusement. "Sit please. I'd like your opinion." He obliged, settling onto one of the cushioned chairs she'd arranged, the synthetic grass cool beneath his boots. Elara joined him, her movements graceful as she poured the glowing liquid into 2 cups. It smelled faintly of citrus and something spicier, a scent that piqued his senses. "What's this?" he asked, lifting the cup to inspect it. "A Zoryn tonic," she explained, her voice softening with a hint of pride. "We call it Lunara. It's made from the sap of a crystal tree on my homeworld, energizing but gentle. I thought it might pair well with the meat." Jack took a cautious sip, and his eyes widened as a burst of flavor danced across his tongue, sharp, sweet, and strangely invigorating. "Okay," he said, setting the cup down with a nod. "That's impressive. You're full of surprises, Elara." Her smile was small but genuine, a curve of silver lips that lit up her face. "I'm glad. I've been studying your preferences, spices, textures, the way humans layer taste. It's fascinating how much emotion you put into food." She paused, her tendrils shifting as she reached for a piece of the glowing meat. "On Zoryn, meals are functional. We eat to sustain ourselves, to maintain our energy balance. But here it's more. It's connection." Jack chewed on a bite of the meat, savoring its tender warmth and the subtle hum of something alien beneath the familiar grill marks. "Yeah, I guess it is," he mused, leaning back in his chair. "Food's how we celebrate, how we comfort each other. You're picking it up fast, though. This is better than half the stuff I get at the canteen." Her tendrils shimmered brighter, and Jack felt a pang of warmth at the sight. She was pleased, he could tell even without her saying it. But then her expression shifted, a flicker of curiosity replacing the satisfaction. "Jack," she began, her voice tentative, "may I ask you something? About humans?" "Sure," he said, setting his fork down. "What's on your mind?" She leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on the table, her gaze piercing yet gentle. "Your people, you express so much through distance. The way you avoid touch, the spaces you keep. But I've noticed, with me you're different. Your heart beats faster when I'm near, your temperature rises. Why do you fight it?" Jack froze, the question catching him off guard like a sudden jolt of static. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again, his mind scrambling for a response. She wasn't wrong. He'd felt it too, the way his pulse quickened when she brushed past him in the kitchen, the way her cool presence seemed to linger in the air. But admitting it felt like stepping off a cliff, and Jack Sheppard didn't do cliffs. He built bridges, not leaps. It's not fighting, he said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. It's just boundaries. Humans were complicated. I'm your employer, Elara. There's a line there, you know? Her head tilted, tendrils swaying as she considered his words. Boundaries, she echoed, tasting the word like it was new to her. On Zoryn, we don't draw lines like that. If we feel a connection, we honor it. Touch, closeness, it's how we understand each other. I can sense you, Jack. Not your thoughts, but your rhythms. You're tense, but not unhappy. It's confusing. He swallowed hard, the weight of her honesty pressing against his carefully constructed walls. Yeah, well, humans aren't exactly straightforward, he admitted, running a hand through his hair, a nervous habit she'd probably already noticed. Look, I don't mind you being here. Hell, I like it more than I expected. But we've got to keep things professional, at least for now. Elara nodded slowly, though her eyes held a glint of something unspoken. I respect that, she said, her tone soft but firm. But I wonder, is it professional to feel what I feel from you? Your warmth, it's stronger than most Zoryn I've known. It's why I stayed close that first night. It drew me in. Jack's breath hitched, and for a moment he couldn't look away from her. Those emerald eyes seemed to see right through him, peeling back layers he'd spent years reinforcing. He wanted to argue, to deflect, but the truth hung heavy between them. He was drawn to her too, in a way that defied logic or contracts. Her presence was a quiet storm, unsettling yet magnetic, and he wasn't sure how long he could pretend otherwise. Let's make a deal, he said at last, forcing a lightness into his voice to break the tension. You keep teaching me about Zoryn, like this food, these tonics, and I'll show you how humans do things. Boundaries and all. Deal? Her smile returned, brighter this time, and she extended a hand across the table in a gesture he recognized as distinctly human. Deal, she agreed, her cool fingers brushing his as they shook. The contact sent a shiver up his spine, subtle but undeniable, and he pulled back with a cough to mask it. Good, he said, picking up his cup again. Now tell me about these fruits. They're glowing. Are they safe to eat, or am I about to light up like a beacon? Elara laughed, the sound like a ripple across the pool beside them. Perfectly safe, she assured him, popping one into her mouth with a playful flourish. They're called stellaris. On Zoryn we eat them to celebrate new beginnings. I thought it fitting for today. Jack hesitated, then followed her lead, the fruit bursting with a tart sweetness that made him smile despite himself. New beginnings, he repeated, glancing at her across the table. The artificial sun bathed them in its glow, the water's edge reflecting their silhouettes, and for the first time in years, Jack felt the stirrings of something he hadn't known he'd missed, connection, fragile but real. As they ate in companionable silence, the hum of new Terra faded into the background, leaving only the two of them and the promise of whatever came next. Chapter 3. The Ritual of Starlight. The night sky over New Terra was a tapestry of wonders, a vast expanse of twinkling stars and swirling nebulae framed by the towering spires of the city. From the wide, arched window of Jack Sheppard's living room, the galaxy seemed close enough to touch, its light spilling across the polished floor in silvery pools. 2 weeks had passed since Elara Vox had entered his life, turning his quiet routine upside down with her alien customs and unshakable curiosity. Tonight, though, the air felt different, charged with an anticipation Jack couldn't quite name as he watched her prepare for something she called the Ritual of Starlight. Elara knelt on a woven mat she'd spread out near the window, her silver skin glowing faintly under the starlight. She wore a flowing garment of translucent fabric, its edges shimmering like liquid crystal, a stark contrast to the practical tunic she usually favored. In her hands she held a small vial of luminous dust, its contents sparkling as if it contained fragments of the cosmos itself. Her tendrils swayed gently, catching the light in iridescent flashes, and Jack found himself mesmerized despite the unease prickling at the back of his mind. So, what's this ritual about? He asked, leaning against the arm of his couch, arms crossed over his chest. His tone was casual, but his hazel eyes betrayed a flicker of nerves. He'd agreed to join her, mostly out of curiosity, partly because saying no to Elara was proving harder than he'd expected, but he still wasn't sure what he'd signed up for. Elara looked up, her emerald gaze steady and warm. It's a tradition from Zoryn, she said, her voice soft yet resonant, like a melody carried on the wind. We use the dust of our star crystals to trace patterns on each other's skin. It strengthens our bonds, lets us feel what the other feels. It's intimate in our way. I thought it might help you understand me better. Jack's throat tightened at the word intimate. He'd spent the past 2 weeks building walls, however flimsy, between them, clinging to the idea of professionalism even as her presence chipped away at it. But there was no denying the pull he felt. The way her laughter lit up his days or her quiet diligence made his apartment feel less like a sterile box and more like a home. "Intimate, huh?" he said, forcing a grin to mask his unease. "You sure this isn't just an excuse to get me shirtless?" Her tendrils shimmered with what he now recognized as amusement, and she tilted her head in that curious way of hers. "It does require some exposure," she admitted, her lips twitching into a smile. "But I promise it's not a trick. Will you join me?" He hesitated, then sighed, pushing off the couch with a mock groan. "Fine. But if this turns me into a glowing billboard, I'm blaming you." He tugged his jumpsuit down to his waist, leaving his chest bare, and settled onto the mat across from her. The cool air brushed his skin, raising goosebumps, but it was her gaze, intense yet gentle, that sent a shiver down his spine. Elara dipped her fingers into the vial, the stardust clinging to them like liquid light. "Hold still," she murmured, leaning closer. Her breath was cool against his skin as she began to trace patterns across his chest, swirling lines and delicate arcs that glowed faintly where they touched him. Jack tensed at first, the sensation strange and tingling, but as her fingers moved, he felt something shift. It wasn't just the dust, it was her, a wave of emotion seeping through the contact, subtle yet overwhelming. He closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. There was loneliness there, a quiet ache of a life spent far from Zoryn's crystalline plains. But beneath it was warmth, a blooming joy that pulsed in time with her touch, and something deeper, something that felt suspiciously like affection. For him. His breath hitched, and when he opened his eyes, Elara was watching him, her tendrils still as if she were holding her own breath. "You feel it too, don't you?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "The dust, it amplifies what's already there. I've been alone for so long, Jack. But with you, it's different." Jack swallowed hard, his heart pounding against the glowing patterns on his chest. "Yeah," he rasped, barely recognizing his own voice. "I feel it. You're not what I expected, Elara. I don't know what to do with that." She paused, her hand hovering over his skin, the stardust shimmering between them. "On Zoryn we don't hide what we feel," she said, her eyes searching his. "If there's a connection we embrace it. I've sensed it in you, your warmth, your strength. It draws me closer than I thought possible." He stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. He couldn't deny the way his pulse raced when she was near, the way her presence filled a void he hadn't even known existed. But humans didn't work like Zoryn, did they? They overthought, hesitated, built barriers. Yet here she was, tearing those barriers down with nothing more than honesty and a handful of glowing dust. "Elara," he began, his voice rough with emotion, it's a lot. I'm not good at this, letting people in. But you're making it damn hard to keep you out." Her tendrils shimmered again, brighter this time, and she set the vial aside, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. "Then don't," she said simply. "Let me in, Jack. Just for tonight." The air between them thickened, charged with a tension that had been building since that first morning. He reached out, hesitant at first, then steadier, his fingers brushing the cool silver of her cheek. Her skin was smooth, almost liquid under his touch, and she leaned into it, her eyes fluttering shut. It was all the permission he needed. He closed the distance, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepening as the stardust's glow pulsed between them. She tasted faintly of the Lunara tonic, sharp and sweet, and her coolness contrasted with the heat rising in his chest. Her tendrils brushed his face, soft and alive, and through the kiss he felt her again, her joy, her longing, her trust. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, and for once Jack didn't fight it. When they parted, breathless, the room seemed brighter, the starlight amplifying the patterns on his skin. Elara rested her forehead against his, her tendrils curling gently around his neck. "That was human?" she asked, a playful lilt in her voice despite the huskiness. Jack chuckled, the sound rough but warm. "Yeah, pretty human. Guess I'm rubbing off on you." "Good," she murmured, pulling back just enough to meet his gaze. "Because there's more I'd like to share. About us, about what we could be." He frowned slightly, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" She traced a glowing line on his chest, her touch lingering. "Zoryn and humans were compatible. Not just emotionally but biologically. It's rare but it happens. Children have been born from such bonds. I didn't think it mattered until now." Jack's eyes widened, his mind reeling. "Wait, you're saying we could?" He trailed off, the implications too vast to grasp in the haze of the moment. Not yet, she said quickly, her tendrils shimmering with a mix of excitement and nerves. But it's possible. I wanted you to know because I feel this, Jack. I feel us. And I think you do too. He stared at her, the glowing patterns on his chest mirroring the chaos in his heart. She was right. He did feel it, a connection deeper than he'd ever known, sparked by stardust and sealed with a kiss. But the idea of what she'd just suggested, a future, a family, shook him to his core. He wasn't ready for that, was he? And yet, as he looked into her emerald eyes, he couldn't imagine turning away. Okay, he said at last, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Let's take it slow. One step at a time. But I'm in, Elara. Whatever this is, I'm in. Her smile was radiant, a burst of light that rivaled the stars outside. One step at a time, she agreed, resting her hand over his heart, where the stardust still glowed. That's all I ask. And as they sat there, bathed in the light of 1,000 distant worlds, Jack felt the first threads of something new weaving between them. A bond that defied species, distance, and the walls he'd once thought unbreakable. Chapter 4, A Wind from the Past. The hum of New Terra's nightlife pulsed through the air as Jack Sheppard pushed open the heavy doors of the Nebula Lounge, a popular haunt nestled in the city's bustling entertainment district. Neon lights flickered across the curved walls, casting kaleidoscopic patterns over the eclectic crowd, humans in sleek jumpsuits, insectoid traders from the Orion Belt, and a scattering of Zoryn expatriates whose silver skin glinted like stars. The air buzzed with the thrum of electronic music and the clink of glasses, a chaotic symphony that Jack usually found invigorating. Tonight, though, his focus was on the figure beside him, Elara Vox, her tendrils swaying nervously as she stepped into the crowded space. It had been Jack's idea to bring her here, 3 weeks after the ritual of Starlight had shifted their relationship into uncharted territory. The kiss they'd shared still lingered in his mind, a quiet fire that warmed him even as it unsettled him. He wanted her to see more of his world, to meet the people who'd shaped it. His crew, his friends. Elara had agreed with her usual enthusiasm, her emerald eyes bright with curiosity, but now, as they wove through the throng, Jack sensed a flicker of hesitation in her usually fluid stride. You okay? He asked, leaning close to be heard over the music. His hand brushed her arm, a casual gesture that sent a familiar jolt through him. Her coolness against his warmth, a contrast he was growing to crave. Elara nodded, though her tendrils stilled for a moment, a sign of unease he'd come to recognize. It's loud, she said, her melodic voice cutting through the noise with surprising clarity. Zoryn gatherings are quieter, more structured. But I'm fine. I want to understand this part of you. Jack grinned, a surge of affection softening his edges. Good. You'll like the crew, they're loud too, but they're good people. Come on, they're over there. He guided her toward a corner booth where a handful of familiar faces lounged, their laughter rising above the din. But before they reached it, a voice cut through the crowd, sharp, familiar, and laced with an edge that made Jack's stomach tighten. Jack Sheppard, as I live and breathe. Still dragging strays into orbit, I see. He turned, and there she was, Lara Kane, leaning against the bar with a glass of amber liquid in hand. Her dark hair was cropped shorter than he remembered, her piercing gray eyes fixed on him with a mix of amusement and something harder. Lara had been his co-pilot years back, a brilliant navigator with a tongue as sharp as her instincts. They'd been close once, friends, confidants, until a mission gone sideways had driven a wedge between them. She'd walked away and Jack hadn't seen her since. Until now. Lara, he said, forcing a smile as he stopped short. Didn't expect to run into you here. Small galaxy, she replied, her gaze sliding to Elara. And who's this? Your latest project. Her tone was light, but there was a bite to it, a skepticism that set Jack's nerves on edge. Elara stepped forward, her posture straight despite the tension Jack could feel radiating from her. I'm Elara Vox, she said, her voice steady. I work for Jack. And more perhaps. Her tendrils shimmered faintly, a flicker of defiance or nerves, Jack couldn't tell which. Lara's eyebrows shot up, her lips curling into a smirk. More huh? That's a new one even for you, Jack. What's the deal, hired help with benefits? Or are you playing savior to another lost soul? Jack bristled, his hand tightening into a fist at his side. It's not like that, he snapped, his voice low but firm. Elara's not a project. She's... He faltered, the words tangling in his throat. What was she to him? A housekeeper? A friend? Something more, undefined but undeniable? He settled for, she's with me. That's all you need to know. Lara took a sip of her drink, her eyes never leaving Elara. With you? She echoed, her tone dripping with doubt. You sure about that, Sheppard? Mixing with Zoryn's tricky business. They're not like us, too sensitive, too clingy. You're in over your head and you don't even see it. Elara's tendrils stilled completely, and Jack felt a pang of unease as her expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable flickering across her silver features. I'm not a burden, she said quietly, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. I chose to be here. With Jack. If that's a problem, it's yours, not ours. The air grew heavy, the music fading into a dull roar as Jack watched the exchange. Lara's smirk faltered, but she shrugged, turning back to the bar. Suit yourself, she muttered. Just don't say I didn't warn you, Jack. She'll pull you under one way or another. Before Jack could respond, Elara turned and slipped through the crowd, her silver form disappearing toward the exit. He cursed under his breath, shooting Lara a glare before following her. Nice seeing you too, he called over his shoulder, his tone sharp with sarcasm. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, the city's lights painting the sky in hues of violet and gold. Elara stood near a railing overlooking a hovercar lane, her arms wrapped around herself, her tendrils drooping like wilted flowers. Jack slowed as he approached, his chest tightening at the sight of her, so strong, yet so fragile in this moment. Hey, he said softly, stopping a few steps away. You didn't have to run off like that. Lara's she's got a chip on her shoulder. Always has. Elara didn't turn, her voice barely above a whisper. She's not wrong though. I am different. Too sensitive maybe. I feel everything, Jack, your tension back there, her disdain. It's heavy. She paused, her tendrils trembling. I've been rejected before. On another world before I came here. They called me a liability, said I didn't belong. I thought I'd left that behind. Jack's heart sank, a wave of guilt and protectiveness crashing over him. He stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder, her coolness grounding him even now. You're not a liability, he said, his voice firm. Not to me. Lara doesn't know you, she doesn't know us. What we've got, it's not her business. She turned then, her emerald eyes glistening with unshed emotion. But what if she's right? What if I pull you under? I feel so much with you, Jack, more than I ever have. It scares me. He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing the smooth silver of her cheeks. You're not pulling me anywhere I don't want to go, he said, his voice rough with conviction. Yeah, this is new, scary as hell sometimes. But I'm here because I want to be. Because you're worth it, Elara. Past, present, whatever, I'm not letting some old ghost change that. Her tendrils lifted slightly, shimmering faintly as she leaned into his touch. You mean that? She asked, her voice trembling with hope. Damn right I do, he said, pulling her closer until their foreheads touched. Lara can shove her warnings. I've flown through asteroid fields with worse odds than this, and I'm still standing. We'll figure it out, together. Elara's laugh was soft, a fragile sound that broke through the tension like dawn through darkness. Together? She echoed, her hands resting over his. I like that word. Good, he murmured, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was brief but fierce, a promise sealed in the shadow of the city's lights. She pressed against him, her coolness a balm to the heat of his resolve, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. When they pulled apart, Jack kept her hand in his, squeezing it gently. Let's skip the crew tonight, he said, nodding toward the apartment tower in the distance. I'd rather be home with you. Elara smiled, a quiet radiance returning to her features. Home, she said, testing the word as if it were new. Yes, I'd like that. They walked back in silence, the wind carrying echoes of the past but unable to shake the bond growing between them, a bond forged in starlight and tempered by the courage to face whatever came next. Chapter 5, Family from Afar. The sterile hum of the intergalactic medical hub filled the air, a low buzz that mingled with the faint beeps of diagnostic machines and the murmur of voices speaking in a dozen alien tongues. Jack Sheppard stood in the center of a small examination room, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his hazel eyes fixed on the holographic display floating before him. The image flickered with intricate patterns, genetic markers, cellular structures, a tiny heartbeat pulsing in rhythmic light. Beside him, Elara Vox rested on an examination table, her silver skin shimmering under the clinical glow, her tendrils swaying gently as she watched the same display with a quiet, radiant pride. It had been a month since their night at the Nebula Lounge, since Jack had silenced the echoes of Lara Kane's doubts with a kiss and a promise. Their days had settled into a new rhythm, Meals shared in the garden, quiet evenings under the stars, stolen moments of closeness that deepened the bond they'd forged in Starlight. But this morning, a sudden wave of dizziness had sent Elara reeling, and Jack had insisted on a visit to the hub. Now, as the Zoryn doctor's voice broke through his reverie, he felt the ground shift beneath him in a way no asteroid field ever had. "Congratulations," Dr. Corbin Vale said, his deep voice resonating with a mix of professionalism and excitement. He was a towering figure, his own silver skin etched with intricate scars, his tendrils shorter and more rigid than Elara's. A sign of age or status, Jack wasn't sure. "You're looking at a healthy Zoryn-human hybrid. Gestation is progressing rapidly, as is typical for our species. I'd estimate 8 weeks until delivery." Jack's breath caught, his mind scrambling to process the words. 8 weeks? He repeated, his voice cracking with disbelief. "But we just..." He glanced at Elara, who met his gaze with a small, knowing smile, her emerald eyes glinting with something between amusement and tenderness. "Zoryn pregnancies are efficient," she said softly, her hand resting lightly on her still flat stomach. "Our bodies don't linger once compatibility is confirmed. I felt it this morning, the first signs. I didn't want to alarm you until I was sure." "Sure?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tick that drew a faint shimmer from Elara's tendrils. "Elara, this is huge. A kid? In 8 weeks. I'm still getting used to us." Dr. Vale chuckled, adjusting the holographic display with a flick of his wrist. "It's remarkable, truly. The first documented hybrid in this sector. The genetic integration is flawless, Zoryn adaptability paired with human resilience. I've already drafted a preliminary report for the Galactic Medical Archives." Jack shot him a sidelong glance, half exasperated, half amused. "Great. Glad our kid's a science project already." But beneath the sarcasm, a swell of pride and panic tightened his chest. A child. His and Elara's. The thought was dizzying, a mix of joy and terror that left him grasping for something solid. Elara reached out, her cool fingers brushing his arm, grounding him as always. "Jack," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor he could feel through her touch. "I know it's fast. But I feel him already, his spark. He's ours." He looked at her, really looked, and saw the certainty in her eyes, the love that radiated from her like the stardust she'd once traced on his skin. "Him?" he asked, a grin tugging at his lips despite himself. She nodded, her tendrils glowing faintly. "Yes, his son. I can sense it." Before Jack could respond, a chime echoed through the room, sharp and insistent. The hub's AI interface flared to life, projecting a new hologram, this one a live feed, crackling with static before resolving into 2 striking Zoryn faces. The male, Thane Zor, had a stern jawline and tendrils of deep silver, his presence commanding even through the screen. Beside him, Lady Celine's features were softer, her tendrils a cascade of iridescent white, but her eyes held the same unyielding intensity. "Daughter," Thane's voice boomed, vibrating with authority. "Our familial sensors detected a cross-species conception. We're en route to Earth for the blessing of the line, a matter of utmost tradition." Elara's tendrils drooped slightly, a flicker of alarm crossing her face. "Mother, father," she said, her tone laced with nervous energy, "this is unexpected. We weren't prepared for you so soon." "Nonsense," Lady Celine interjected, her voice melodic yet firm. "The first blessing must occur before the 3rd phase of gestation. We'll arrive in 12 Earth hours. Your human companion, he's ready for the trials, I presume?" Jack's stomach dropped. "Trials?" he echoed, stepping closer to Elara. "What trials?" Thane's gaze shifted to him, assessing, and Jack felt the weight of it like a physical force. "The tests of worth," he said, his tone clipped. "Any outsider seeking to join our bloodline must prove their strength, through combat, through harmony. It's our way." "Combat?" Jack's voice rose, a mix of incredulity and dread. "You're kidding, right? I'm an engineer, not a gladiator." Elara squeezed his hand, her touch a silent plea for calm. "It's symbolic, Jack," she said quickly, though her tendrils betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "Mostly. The vow of fire, it's a ritual dance with energy blades. My father will guide you." "Energy blades?" Jack turned to her, his eyes wide. "Symbolic doesn't sound like blades, Elara." Dr. Vale cleared his throat, his tendrils twitching with scholarly enthusiasm. "Fascinating tradition, really. The blades are ceremonial, minor cellular disruption at worst. Easily repaired with our tech. I'll ensure proper protocols are in place." "Not helping, Doc," Jack muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked back at the hologram where Thane and Celine waited, their expressions unreadable. Okay, look, I'm not saying no, but can we at least talk this out when you get here? I'm still wrapping my head around the dad thing. Lady Celine's lips curved into a faint smile. Adaptable as Elara said. Good. We'll see you soon, human. Survive the trials and you'll earn our blessing, and our grandsons. The feed cut off, leaving the room in a stunned silence broken only by Dr. Vale's enthusiastic tapping on his datapad. Remarkable, he murmured. Cross-cultural dynamics during accelerated gestation. I must document this. Jack sank into a nearby chair, Elara sliding off the table to kneel before him, her hands clasping his. Jack, she said, her voice soft but urgent, I know this is overwhelming. My family, they're traditional, rigid even. But they mean well. They want to welcome you in their way. By stabbing me with energy blades? He quipped, though his tone softened as he met her gaze. Elara, I'm not exactly the prove my worth type. I fix engines, not fight aliens. She smiled, a fragile curve of silver lips. You're stronger than you think. I felt it, your heart, your resolve. And I'll be with you every step. They can't take that from us. He took a deep breath, her words sinking in, steadying him. Okay, he said finally, his hand covering hers. If it's for you, for him, I'll do it. But you're teaching me how to hold a damn blade first. Her laugh was a melody, lightening the weight on his chest. Deal, she said, her tendrils glowing with relief. We'll practice tonight. You'll be fine, Jack, I promise. Dr. Vale looked up from his notes, grinning. Excellent. I'll prepare a medical brief on blade injuries, just in case. Jack groaned, but Elara's hand in his kept the panic at bay. 12 hours. A child in 8 weeks. A trial by fire with his soon-to-be in-laws. His life had spiraled far beyond the quiet solitude he'd once known, but as he looked at Elara, her strength, her faith in him, he felt a flicker of something new. Not just fear but purpose. They were building something together, something worth fighting for. All right, he said, standing and pulling her up with him. Let's get home. I've got a crash course in alien swordplay to survive. She leaned into him, her coolness a comfort against the storm ahead. Together, she whispered, and Jack nodded, holding her close as they stepped out into the uncertain future. One blade, one heartbeat, one family at a time. Chapter 6. A Birth Under Firelight. The makeshift arena stretched across a barren field on the outskirts of New Terra, its boundaries marked by flickering rings of holographic fire that cast an eerie orange glow against the twilight sky. Above, the sleek silhouette of a Zoryn vessel hovered, its hull shimmering with crystalline energy, a silent sentinel over the ritual unfolding below. Jack Sheppard stood in the center of the circle, his boots sinking slightly into the synthetic soil, his hands gripping a ceremonial energy blade that pulsed with a soft violet hum. Sweat beaded on his brow, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm as he faced Thane Zor, Elara's father, whose own blade gleamed with lethal elegance. 12 hours had passed since the hologram from Thane and Lady Celine had upended Jack's world, and those hours had been a blur of preparation. Elara had guided him through the basics of the Vow of Fire, a ritual dance of combat meant to test his worthiness, her cool hand steadying his as he fumbled with the blade. Now, clad in a lightweight tunic borrowed from the Zoryn ship, Jack felt woefully out of his depth, an engineer thrust into a warrior's game. But Elara's faith in him, her quiet strength watching from the sidelines, kept his resolve burning brighter than the fire around them. Begin, Thane intoned, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through the arena. His tendrils flared, silver and rigid, as he lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air with a precision that made Jack's stomach lurch. Instinct kicked in, years of dodging machinery and navigating tight spaces, and Jack sidestepped, the blade missing him by inches. A ripple of surprise crossed Thane's stern features, and Jack felt a flicker of pride despite the adrenaline surging through him. From the observation platform, Lady Celine's voice drifted down, sharp with critique. His stance is abysmal, she said, her iridescent tendrils swaying as she leaned forward. Are we certain he's fit for our line? Mother. Elara's protest cut through the tension, her voice edged with pregnancy-heightened emotion. She stood at the platform's edge, her silver skin aglow under the firelight, her hands clenched at her sides. Jack's adapting, just give him a chance. Thane didn't pause, executing a series of swift strikes that forced Jack to parry clumsily, the energy blade sparking against his own. Adaptation is strength, Thane said, his tone gruff but not unkind. Let's see if he has it. Jack gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as he blocked another blow. Then something clicked, a faint echo in his chest, a rhythm that wasn't his own. Elara. Their bond, forged in starlight and deepened by the life growing within her, pulsed through him. He could feel her focus, her trust, and it guided him. He ducked a sweeping strike, moving with a grace he didn't know he possessed, and Thane's eyes narrowed in approval. Interesting, the elder Zoryn murmured, his blade humming dangerously close to Jack's ear. You've bonded deeply. Most humans wouldn't sense it. Yeah, well, Jack grunted, parrying another strike, your daughter's got a way of getting under my skin. A faint chuckle escaped Thane, but before he could respond, a sharp cry pierced the air. Jack's head snapped toward the platform, where Elara doubled over, her tendrils flaring brilliantly. Jack, she gasped, clutching her abdomen, her voice tight with pain. Panic seized him, his blade deactivating with a flick of his thumb as he rushed toward her. Elara, what's wrong? Thane lowered his weapon, his stern facade cracking with concern, while Lady Selene leapt from the platform with surprising agility, landing beside her daughter. The child? She asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Corbin Vale emerged from the sidelines, his datapad glowing as he scanned Elara. Her water's broken, he announced, his tendrils twitching with excitement. The emotional intensity of the trial, it's accelerated the final phase. Fascinating. Less fascinating, more helping. Jack snapped, reaching Elara's side and taking her hand. Her grip was fierce, her cool fingers trembling against his, and through their bond he felt it, pain yes but also determination, a fierce love that anchored him. Lady Selene blocked his path, her tendrils rigid. The trials aren't complete, she said, her tone insistent. The blessing. Mother, Elara interrupted through gritted teeth, her tendrils pulsing with each contraction. Our son is coming now. Traditions can wait. Thane stepped forward, his blade deactivating with a soft hiss. She's right, he said, his voice softening. But there's precedent. The rite of life, combat energy channeled to aid the birth. It's rare but it's been done. Do it, Elara gasped, squeezing Jack's hand as another wave hit her. Through their bond, he felt the intensity, a shared sensation that made his knees buckle. Dr. Vale's eyes lit up. Remarkable. I'll direct the synchronization. Form a triad, Jack, Thane, Selene, blades at the ready. Jack hesitated, his gaze locked on Elara's pained but resolute face. You sure about this? He whispered, brushing a tendril from her brow. Yes, she breathed, her emerald eyes fierce. Together. Thane and Selene took their positions, forming a triangle around Elara as she knelt on the ground, Jack at her side. Their blades reactivated, weaving a matrix of violet light that pulsed in time with her contractions. Dr. Vale's voice guided them, calm and precise. Channel the energy inward, focus on her rhythm. The human biofield will amplify it. Jack obeyed, his blade trembling in his grip as he poured his will into it, not to fight but to protect. The light intensified, and through their bond he felt everything, Elara's struggle, her strength, and the bright spark of their son, a presence so vivid it stole his breath. Thane's stern focus and Selene's quiet grace melded with his, a harmony of intent that transcended species. The hybrid genetics are responding, Dr. Vale exclaimed, his datapad flashing. Magnificent. Less commentary, Doc, Jack growled, his voice strained as he held Elara's hand, her nails digging into his skin. Come on, love, you've got this. Her tendrils flared, a burst of light that matched the matrix around them, and with a final shuddering push, the arena erupted in a flash of bioluminescent brilliance. The cry that followed was piercing, a sound both human and Zoryn, raw and resonant. Jack blinked against the glare, his heart stopping as Elara slumped against him, a tiny form cradled in her arms. Kale, she whispered, her voice hoarse but triumphant, naming him after an old Earth word for sky, a defender of the stars. The baby's skin was a pale silver tinged with human warmth, his eyes a vivid green like his mother's, and his tendrils, small, delicate, shimmered with a pattern uniquely his own. Thane deactivated his blade, kneeling beside them, his stern face softening into awe. By the crystals of Zoryn, he breathed, he's perfect. Lady Selene's tendrils glowed as she touched Kale's tiny hand. A new bloodline, she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. The first of his kind. Jack stared at his son, his chest aching with a love so fierce it dwarfed the fear of the trial. Hey little guy, he said, his voice breaking as he brushed a finger across Kale's cheek. The baby's eyes met his, and through their bond, now a triad, he felt a spark of recognition, a connection that bound them all. Well fought, human, Thane said, placing a heavy hand on Jack's shoulder. You've proven yourself, not just in combat but in this. Does that mean no more trials? Jack asked, half hopeful, cradling Elara as she leaned into him, exhausted but radiant. Selene laughed, a rare musical sound. Not quite. But we'll adapt, for him. For Kale, Elara corrected, her tendrils brushing Jack's arm as she smiled up at him. For us. Dr. Vale interjected, still scribbling notes. These genetics are revolutionary, the human-Zoryn blend could. Doc, Jack, Elara, and Thane said in unison, their voices a chorus of exasperation. Right, Vale muttered, grinning. Family moment. Noted. The firelight dimmed, the arena fading into the background as Jack held his family close. Elara's cool strength, Kale's fragile warmth, a union born under blades and stars, stronger than any trial could break. Chapter 7, Lights of New Terra. The balcony of Jack Sheppard's apartment overlooked the sprawling expanse of New Terra, a city that never slept, its lights twinkling like a constellation brought to Earth. Hovercars streaked through the night sky, their trails of neon weaving patterns against the velvet dark, while starships rumbled faintly in the distance, ferrying travelers to worlds beyond. 3 months had passed since the firelit birth of Kale Ryder, and the chaos of that night had softened into a new rhythm, a life Jack could scarcely believe was his own. He leaned against the railing, the cool metal grounding him as he cradled his son, the boy's tiny tendrils shimmering faintly under the city's glow. Elara Vox stood beside him, her silver skin catching the light in a way that still took his breath away. She wore a simple tunic now, its fabric shimmering faintly like the ceremonial garb of Zoryn, but her presence was softer, more at ease. The past months had been a whirlwind, adjusting to parenthood, navigating the complexities of a hybrid child, and hosting Thane and Lady Selene, who'd lingered longer than expected to oversee Kale's early rites. Tonight, though, was different. The Zoryn ship had departed at last, leaving behind a quiet that felt both strange and sacred, a space for Jack and Elara to claim as their own. He's growing fast, Jack murmured, his voice low as he brushed a finger across Kale's cheek. The baby's skin was a pale silver, warmed by human undertones, his green eyes, Elara's eyes, bright with a curiosity that seemed older than his weeks. His tendrils, delicate and new, pulsed faintly, responding to Jack's touch with a shimmer that echoed their bond. Zoryn children do, Elara replied, her melodic voice warm with pride. She rested a hand on Jack's arm, her coolness a familiar comfort. But he's different. Slower than pure Zoryn, stronger than most humans. Dr. Vale says it's the blend. He's unique. Jack chuckled, a rough sound softened by affection. Unique, huh? Guess that's what we get for mixing stardust and stubbornness. He shifted Kale in his arms, marveling at the weight of him, so small, yet so monumental. He'd taken leave from his engineering post, trading starship engines for late-night feedings and lullabies, and though he missed the hum of machinery, this felt right. Elara's tendrils swayed, glowing faintly as she leaned closer, her gaze drifting to the city below. I've been thinking, she said, her tone thoughtful. About staying. Not just as your housekeeper but, here. With you. I've spoken to the agency, they've offered me a role helping bridge Zoryn and Earth relations. I could do good, Jack. For us, for him. He turned to her, surprise flickering in his hazel eyes. You mean it? No more contract, no more employer stuff, just us. Her smile was radiant, a burst of light that rivaled the city's glow. Just us, she confirmed, her hand finding his. I came here to work, to survive. But you gave me more, a home, a family. I want to build that with you. Jack's chest tightened, a swell of emotion he didn't bother to hide. Elara, he said, his voice rough with feeling, you had me the minute you climbed into my bed that first night. I'm not letting you go, agency or not. Her laugh was a melody, light and free, and she pressed a kiss to his cheek, her lips cool against his warmth. Good, she murmured. Because I'm rather attached. The moment was broken by a soft chime from inside, the apartment's AI signaling guests. Jack groaned playfully, shifting Kale to one arm. Who now? Your parents back for round 2. Elara's tendrils shimmered with amusement. No, they're halfway to Zoryn by now. It's our party, remember? The crew, a few friends. A human tradition, you said, to celebrate new beginnings. Right, Jack said, grinning as he led her back inside. Let's hope they don't bring energy blades. The living room was transformed, a blend of Earth and Zoryn, streamers and bright human hues draped alongside crystalline ornaments from Elara's homeworld, glowing softly. The crew from Jack's old engineering team mingled with a handful of Zoryn expatriates Elara had befriended, their laughter filling the space. A table groaned under the weight of food, human barbecue, Zoryn stellaris fruits, and a pitcher of Lunara tonic that sparkled in the light. But the room stilled as a familiar figure stepped through the door. Lara Kane, her dark hair catching the glow, her gray eyes wary but softer than Jack remembered. He tensed, the memory of their last encounter flashing through him, but Elara's hand on his arm steadied him. "Jack," Lara said, her voice hesitant as she approached. "Elara. I wasn't sure you'd want me here. But I owed you this." She held out a small package wrapped in metallic paper, a peace offering Jack realized. He took it, his grip on Kale tightening slightly. "Lara," he said, his tone cautious but not cold. "Didn't expect you." "I was wrong," she admitted, her gaze dropping to Kale, then back to them. "At the lounge I judged too fast. Seeing you now, you've got something real. I'm sorry for what I said." Elara's tendrils glowed faintly, her empathy sensing the sincerity beneath Lara's words. "Thank you," she said, her voice gentle. "You're welcome here. For Kale's sake, and ours." Jack nodded, the last threads of old resentment unraveling. "Yeah. Clean slate, Kane. Grab some tonic, stay a while." Lara's smile was small but genuine, and she joined the crowd, leaving Jack and Elara to exchange a look of quiet triumph. Before they could settle, Dr. Corbin Vale bustled over, his datapad glowing as always, his tendrils twitching with excitement. "I've analyzed Kale's latest scans," he announced, oblivious to the party's hum. "His hybrid traits, they're extraordinary. Enhanced empathic range, potential for interspecies communication. He could be a bridge between worlds." Jack groaned, but there was a grin behind it. "Doc, can the science wait? We're celebrating here." Of course," Vale said, chuckling. "But his naming rights, Zoryn tradition might need tweaking for his unique structure." "Doc," Elara and Jack said in unison, their voices a playful echo of the arena's exasperation. Vale raised his hands in surrender, retreating with a grin, and Elara leaned into Jack, her tendrils brushing Kale's tiny ones. "He's right though," she murmured. "Kale's special. Like his father." "Like his mother," Jack countered, kissing her forehead. The party swirled around them. Laughter, music, the clink of glasses. But they stood apart, a family forged in starlight and fire, now bathed in the lights of new Terra. Later, as the guests thinned and the night deepened, they returned to the balcony, Kale asleep in Jack's arms. The city stretched before them, a canvas of possibility, and Elara's voice broke the silence, soft and sure. "What do you see out there?" she asked, her hand resting over his heart. Jack looked at the lights, the ships, the endless sky, but his answer came from within. "Us," he said simply. "You, me, Kale. A future we're building one crazy step at a time." Her tendrils glowed, a beacon in the dark, and she pressed closer, her coolness merging with his warmth. "A future," she echoed, her eyes on the stars. "I like that." They stood there, a trio bound by love and resilience, the lights of new Terra reflecting their journey, a story that began with a stranger in the dawn and ended with a family under the stars. And as a distant ship arced toward the galaxy, Jack knew this was only the beginning, a bridge between worlds, lit by the sun they'd made together. And so, we've journeyed through an emotional exploration, from the fateful morning when Jack Sheppard was pinned down by his Zoryn housekeeper Elara Vox, through the days of bonding under the stars of new Terra, to the moment they welcomed the first human Zoryn hybrid child amidst the glow of a ceremonial fire. It's a tale of difference, love and harmony transcending all cosmic boundaries. Don't forget to leave a like and a subscribe to support us in hitting 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Your encouragement is a tremendous driving force for the Sci-Fi Nebula channel. See you in the next adventure.